Yes.
Oh, but remind all the committee members the mics are all live all the time.
Oh, yes, will do. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. This is a special Planning and Land Use Management Committee meeting that was scheduled for 2:15. We will have a joint committee meeting with the Planning and Land Use Management Committee and Transportation Committee right after this meeting. On this meeting, I'm Councilmember Jose Huizar. We've been joined by Councilmember Marquis Harris Dawson, Councilmember Mitch Englander, and Councilmember Felipe Fuentes. With that, if we could call item number, actually, let's do this. Item number 2, we will continue to August 11th without objection. And item number 3, we will continue to August 11th without objection. On item number 1, if that item could be read into the record, please.
Item number 1 is the matter of inclusion of Circle S Ranch in the list of historic cultural monuments.
Okay, thank you. And so, brief presentation by staff, please. Thank you.
Yes.
And as a reminder, just to committee members and members of the staff sitting by the microphones, they're live all the time. There's no on and off switch. So just as a reminder, if you decide to speak, and we're conducting a hearing here. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Ken Bernstein with Department of City Planning. This item was continued from committee consideration last week. The item was renoticed, and addresses of the subject property were corrected on the agenda for this week. The recommendation from the Cultural Heritage Commission is to declare the subject property a historic cultural monument. The Cultural Heritage Commission vote was unanimous, and that the property met 2 of the historic cultural monument criteria. First, as representing the earliest pattern of residential development in the West Hills area, a rare remaining example of agricultural land use in the San Fernando Valley, and as an excellent example of Dutch colonial revival style architecture.
Thank you. On this item, we have I'm looking through our cards, our public comment speaker cards. We have the owner, Jill Ross Meir.
Councilman Huizar, can I speak first? I'm the representing the property owner.
Sure.
Great. My name is Daniel Friedman. Thank you, Chairman Huizar, members of the committee. I'm representing Joy Ross, opposing this designation. What you have before you today is a nomination to designate a home for which there is no building permit attached, no architect or builder identified, and which was only viewed by the applicant, city staff, and 2 commissioners from the city sidewalk. They did not enter onto the property. We also have an application that was brought without notice to the property owner and without the property owner's consent or approval. If this were, say, a commercial property, that would be one thing, but this is our client's home, single-family home of 45 years. As a result, frankly, with respect to meeting the standards required for designation, which are most important today, the application before you falls short. Applicant seeks to preserve agricultural uses that no longer exist. They want to designate a heavily remodeled house that is not connected with any notable architect, persons, or events. And although applicant labels a house with an architectural style, as the staff just mentioned, they failed to establish why this style has any architectural or historical significance whatsoever. I ask that the committee deny this application and refuse to designate my client's single-family home. To do so would be an insult to all other historic homes that have been designated in our city, and would also raise some important notice issues, as have been discussed at the previous hearing. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your decision.
Thank you. Jill Ross Meir.
I am Jill Ross Meir. I'm here on behalf of my mother, Joy Ross. She lives in the home. We bought this house in the early 70s. It is no longer a ranch. It was a ranch last in the 1950s. There is not anything on the property whatsoever that is a ranch facility. My father has built a gazebo, a garden, all in the 1980s. The interior of the house has been remodeled numerous times over 45 years. And it just doesn't represent anything on the architectural level on the inside, if anybody would have even come up and seen the house. They only merely looked at the house from the sidewalk. We were never notified that we were having this designation. It just came as a surprise in the mail. I was very upset by it. It's been a financial burden on our family. It's not proper that you do this to a senior woman that lives in her house and is merely trying to enjoy what's her life. So anyhow, I would just like you to decline the application, and we would like our privacy restored.
Thank you. Charles Fisher.
Good afternoon, Charlie Fisher, 140 South Avenue 57. I actually prepared the nomination for this particular property, and I think it's very important to note that this property is in fact an example of early development in the San Fernando Valley. It is an example of Dutch colonial revival architecture. It doesn't matter if it was plan book or how the background came, it's still an example of Dutch colonial revival architecture. The house is an example of agricultural estate use. The original owner kept animals on the farm. There were numerous chicken coops at the time of its construction. This house was part of the early agrarian development of the valley. It was also part of the early development by people who had these estates in the valley. There are a number of reasons that this house qualifies. The report that was given does not get into those reasons. It does not discuss those reasons. It merely tries to say it's not a great example of Dutch colonial, nor is it an example of the early valley history, which in fact it is. I realize that that was thrown together very quickly at the time, but in reviewing it, there were a lot of errors that we saw in it. I want to mention also that the owner talks about not being notified. The owner was sent a certified letter for the notification of this, and the son, the brother of the woman that just spoke, came to the cultural heritage hearing, and he asked that the section at the rear of the house be excluded from the designation. The commission concurred with that. We concurred with that. Only the portion where the house is and the outbuildings at the front of the property. This is a very prominent property in the valley. It has been known for years. Daniel Brin tried to contact the owner a couple of years ago to talk about the property. He spoke with a caregiver. He was not able to get to anyone who could talk about the property. There were efforts made to contact the owners because the West Hills area, the neighborhood council, has felt that this is a very, very important house in their neighborhood. It's one of the few remaining examples of this era in the San Fernando Valley. Another letter that was sent in by Elizabeth Harris, and she talks about her own house. It's not too far from this one, which is a historic cultural monument, and the benefits of the Mills Act that she has on that house. This house would be eligible for a Mills Act if declared. I realize it probably wouldn't do much good for the Ross family because they've had it for so many years, but a new owner would definitely benefit from the Mills Act. The other part of it is that they talk about all the changes that were made on the house over the years on the interior, which is interesting. I never saw the interior. None of us saw the interior, but there were only 2 building permits pulled by the Rosses over the years. One in the early 70s, which removed a wall and put in a header, and another one for a chicken coop later on. All this work, the rest of the work was done without permits, so we didn't know about it. But even then, the house still qualifies as an architectural type specimen, as an example of the early development patterns in the San Fernando Valley. And we ask that the council concur with the Cultural Heritage Commission that unanimously voted to declare this house a historic cultural monument. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Margarita Jarabek.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Margarita Jarabek. I'm Director of Historic Resources at PCR. A property must have both integrity and significance to be designated as a historic monument. After touring the property and conducting significant research on the property's history and architecture, it is my opinion that the property is not eligible for historic designation as an early ranch estate. The property lacks integrity as an early example of agricultural land use in the San Fernando Valley in its current state. It has lost any trace of its historic ranch facilities after being subdivided in 1956, leaving a 3-acre property that no longer resembles its 1920s ranch appearance. The criteria for evaluation for historic ranches requires that the property retain full lands and agricultural facilities. This one does not. Only the main house survives. It is not inherently valuable for a study of period, style, or method of construction, nor is it connected with a notable architect or master builder. The house, furthermore, has been substantially altered over the years. As it exists today, it is a mediocre example of a Dutch colonial revival style commonly found throughout the United States and California. It is not a distinctive or outstanding example of its style. It resembles a kit house sold by Sears and other commonly built houses throughout the United States. It is therefore my recommendation that the house not be designated a historic monument. Furthermore, the chicken coop that they refer to is about 4 feet wide. It's a small little chicken coop. The property does not have any ranch facilities left. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I have 3 other cards, but I believe that's for the other special committee. Stuart Waldman, it's on the next item, correct? The joint committee. Dustin Baton, it's on the next, yeah, and Alicia Witzling, correct? I was given to me on this item, but it's actually for the next one, I assume. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Englander.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all that came down here as well. A couple questions, if I could. First, I'd like to start off, Mr. Bernstein, can I ask you a couple questions on this? Our historical cultural monument expert. Ms. Garb?
I do not have a card other than those people I called.
I gave it to that lady over there.
They may have gotten mixed up with our next special
No, it was only addressed to the plum committee
joint committee.
and with this agenda item.
Herman put it in after we started, though.
Yeah, Mr. Herman, we got your cards after the deliberation on the item, which the card was not accepted.
But she's from West Coast.
Anything on that card? Do you have the name? Sergeant? Do you have the name that you're looking for?
Joanne Garb.
Joanne Garb.
She filled out
Okay,
before we
we
started.
will take your word for it, and if you could fill out a card afterwards, you have 1 minute to speak. Go ahead, please.
I'm Joanne Yvanek Garb, West Hills Neighborhood Council, as well as a budget advocate. I live close to this property, and I pass it every time I go to West Hills Medical Center. And my family, every single one of them, and my children, all admire this house as being something from the past. We were initially told that it was the Lucy House from Lucy Arnaz, but we were then told that it wasn't, okay? But still, when you describe this property to anybody who lives in the West Valley, they all know this property. And they all say, this is a house. I have heard more times than I can count that this is a house somebody would like to own and keep it as it is. It's a treasure for the community. And I would hate to see it being torn down or whatever for progress. We have to keep some of our treasures. They're very important to our historical and our cultural memories. So, you know, the fact that there was a compromise saying that the back part of the property, which is untended at all, could be sold off, I think that's a very good compromise. And contrary to somebody's statement, there are 2 buildings on the premises. I see like the garage, like a carriage house, an old carriage house, in addition to the house in the front. So I'm just saying, we voted for this. This has been on our agenda quite a few times, and everybody on our council and everybody in the audience, there has never been a negative statement that this not be declared historical cultural monument. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Garb, we did find your card, so we apologize. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, just a couple questions on the process, because we're starting to get more and more of these historical cultural monument applications through, and I'm just trying to understand, and particularly as our city is aging and more properties are being identified of some type of significance, and we'll get to that in a second, trying to understand the process. Who is it that has the authority or ability to file an application for consideration?
Again, Ken Bernstein, Department of City Planning. Any party may submit a nomination. A nomination may be initiated by the council, by council motion, by the Director of Planning, by the property owner, and in fact the majority of nominations we receive are from property owners themselves, or by any interested community members. So there's no limitation in our ordinance as to who may submit a nomination.
Do they automatically fall into the Mills Act if they are achieved?
If a property is declared a historic cultural monument, a property owner may elect to take the next step and enter into a contract with the city. The Mills Act is a binding contract between the property owner and the city of Los Angeles that can result in a reduction in property taxes. But that's optional, and only a minority of owners take that next step and do enter into a contract.
Mm-hmm. But some do.
Some
And
do.
So there could be a great benefit
Absolutely.
financially to do it as well as not
Correct.
only protecting the culture. Okay. Who else can submit an application? Many members of the public?
Any interested member of the public may submit a nomination, correct?
Is there a nexus between where you have to live or a radius? Can you live out of state, for example, and submit an application?
Conceivably, that's the case. Now, obviously, our office vets nominations very carefully to make certain that they are not frivolous nominations, that they are fully documented and complete.
Right.
And in many cases, we bounce back a nomination that is not complete in order to have additional research done.
Okay, and they'll conduct and oftentimes would resubmit with a more comprehensive package.
Correct.
Okay. So what would you say, have we ever calculated the total cost to the city of taking something through the entire process from the application and the inception of the application to complete fruition of designation?
We have. I apologize. I don't have those numbers with me today, but that is something that we have looked at in the past.
Do you have a rough guess?
In terms of staff time, I think it can be up to a few $1,000s in staff time to take it through. I don't recall the exact number.
So, as the city, I appreciate that. I don't have any further questions, but I do have some statements and comments on this, and I appreciate it. As we are getting up there in age as a city, if you will, and many of our valued properties, and in this particular property, I know it well. Grew up in this community. I remember often, even before Fields Market was there, which is kitty corner to the property, riding my bike through there and thinking, wow, look at that. Somebody lives in this home. It's phenomenal. There's nothing like it anywhere over there in West Hills or in the Northwest Valley. I can't even think, quite frankly, of another property that's similar in nature. I don't know what history that means. But one of the issues and concerns that I've had as I've seen some of these come through is, as an example, and I think he probably has good intentions, Mr. Fisher, is filing these often and doesn't live anywhere near, I'm not even sure in the San Fernando Valley. But that, again, doesn't necessarily mean they don't have an interest to protect historical cultural monuments. But I do have some concern when it's an individual's home that they live in, where oftentimes these are actually generated from the very property owners that live there or in coordination or cooperation with the local community itself. I think the West Hills Neighborhood Council, who I don't believe they formally took a position yet, but I know the land use did, but not the full Neighborhood Council, is that correct? Yeah. Yeah. So, and I take what they consider very, very seriously. However, I think it's the fruit of the poisonous tree. And what I mean by that is the beginning of the process didn't include, because they have very good intentions. And by far, I'll put my neighborhood councils up against any neighborhood councils in the city of having a good heart and good intentions. And West Hills works very, very hard to protect their community, and I'm very grateful for that. But they inherited this from a process that began, I think, on the wrong track, where Mr. Fisher, who applies for often a lot of these, first of all, isn't required to pay a fee, costs the taxpayers thousands of dollars, and now tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for having numerous ones. That is something I think that needs to be explored. There needs to be some type of nexus or council-initiated, property owner-initiated, something based directly involved in the community. And more importantly, in this particular property, we never identified it with historic personage or a notable work of a master builder, a master designer, a master architect. And in fact, it's already been agreed that a lot of the parts of the property has changed over the years. While we're all in awe of this property and think it would be wonderful to protect and keep in its current condition, it's not right now. There's no applications pending for development. It's not for sale. The owners of the property would suffer a tremendous potential hardship, but they haven't been part of this early stage. The application was filed by Friends of Circle S Ranch, and I'm not even quite sure who they are. Is the person who's responsible for Circle S Ranch, because it says Mr. Fisher's a representative of them, they haven't been identified. I don't know if that individual is here. Mr. Fisher, I'm not asking the representative. I'm not asking you. I know, but I'm not asking you, sir, with all due respect. I'm asking if there's an actual Friends of Circle S Ranch here. They couldn't make it today.
Councilman, Mr. Bryn, Dan Bryn from the West Hills Neighborhood Council was identified in the application as the applicant. Mr. Fisher was the preparer. So Dan Bryn is the point person.
Who's the president of the Neighborhood Council.
Right.
And a dear friend of mine, and I think does a phenomenal job, but I don't know who the entity is. And if this is an actual historic entity or somebody who is associated with the property, it was never fully detailed. But I do have a concern over single-family homes that folks from out of town come in and file applications and become representatives when they weren't in full concert with, and I think it does a disservice, particularly to the local residents and the neighborhood councils that work so hard. They heard this over and over, and they weighed in on it. They want to protect this property, but they inherited this application, and they weren't the ones that initiated it. And so I'll be coming back with a study on how we actually present these types of applications to make sure in the future that when neighborhood councils and good folks actually get involved in property owners and trying to protect our historical cultural monuments here in the city, they come from a good place in the beginning. And, you know, I think it's the department's responsibility to take those applications, and Mr. Bernstein, you do a phenomenal job. I mean, I can't even fathom anybody else really running this operation the way you do. And I'm really proud of all the work you do. But the process is not something you ever created, and I think it's really open to, and I'll be careful with this word, but manipulation by some folks who maybe even have good intentions, but again aren't necessarily stakeholders. And I think we need to look at that for that reason. And it doesn't stop this from ever coming to surface again or a new application. Working with the property owners in the future. Again, there's no plans. There's no applications. There's no development plans on this site. I too would like to see this protected in some nature, but I think it needs to be in concert with the property owner, so it's not an informal, and I don't want to use a legal word, taking from that perspective, but I think property owners have a right to have a seat at the table at the beginning of a process. And so a little taken back by how this was initiated, but not the work of the community, because I think they did a phenomenal job, and therefore I asked my colleagues to deny the application based on that.
So, Mr. England, you've made a motion to deny deny the application. Okay, second by Mr. Fuentes. Mr. Harris Dawson? Do you have a Okay. Okay, that's the motion. Any objections? Seeing none, so ordered. Thank you very much. Any other items on the agenda, please? No more items, okay. That concludes the Planning and Land Use Management Committee, and if you would just give us 5 minutes to set up for the next joint meeting of the Planning, Land Use and Management Committee and Transportation Committee. Thank you.